Beate, thank you so much for sending through a selection of images from our recent private safari to Namibia. Brought some really cool moments and memories back. And if all of you would like to stay tuned to see this collection of images, but also a few tips, tricks, and ideas I give Beate in order to potentially better one or two of them, please stay tuned. So I haven't spent much time looking at or through the collection of these images, but at a glance, there are some really cool looking moments. And as I'd mentioned, some really fond memories pop back into my mind with very special moments that we got to enjoy out in and amongst the dunes and cities and rockscapes and everything within Namibia. But just before I get started, the order in which these images are in is how you sent them through. So they are all dunes and then a few wildlife species. So there's obviously a couple of moments or destinations that aren't in here that we visited during our stay. But I will run through it in this order. I'll chat about the dunes and the landscapes, and then we can move on to the wildlife side of things. So let's jump straight into it. Going into our first dune image. I love this moment, and I recall us circling around this dune multiple times. But two things that I will point out with this image is, I'm not too sure if you had cropped this image, but what I would have liked to have seen is the running line of that dune on the top and a little bit more space below this dune over here. So if you have cropped this image, or if not, but you have slightly wider ones, maybe go and have a look for ones like that, just because it feels like the flow is being disturbed here as well as down at the bottom. If we're going to develop, and what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to bring this image up, select these two images, hit C for compare, and can you see the massive difference in color here? The one on the left looks heavily saturated compared to the one on the right. And this could just be personal preference, but what I would personally do if I were processing this image is I'll bring it to a state in which my eye or my memory recalls it to have looked like. So something around there. So we just have that's your before, the one you sent, and that's the after. So it's just dulling down that vibrance ever so slightly. I know by pushing up whites and dropping blacks quite a lot, this is you obviously increasing your contrast, and maybe that's what you did to find a pure white and a pure black, and it oversaturated it somewhat. So I often find myself when I am finding my pure whites and pure black, as I did over here by pushing and holding Option, pulling to the right. There we go. There's some pure white. Pushing, holding Option, left click cursor. I've already got a lot of black there. It does tend to over contrast. Oh, sorry, I didn't show you that. Let's do this again. So pushing and holding Option and left clicking your cursor, pulling this button right, there's some pure white. And black, there's already quite a lot of black in there. But in doing so, it's really making the image very contrasted. And in turn, that could be affecting your light and black points, obviously, but also the color of the image. So maybe just be mindful of when you're doing this next time that your saturation isn't punching out all too much. Another thing I love about this image is the texture in here, the patterns down here, and the smoothness of the dune. So if you don't have images where you don't have the entire flow of this or a bit more space at the bottom, this image would work and is perfectly fine, but maybe then go and look at a slightly more aggressive crop so that you're only heroing a few aspects of this particular scene. That could also work and also looks really cool because now you're showing off texture, there's lines, there's shapes, there's patterns, there's all of that kind of stuff. But a beautiful image, well done. Moving on to the next. Again, love this image, the color and everything's in balance. I really enjoy the look of the image and the colors and textures bouncing off here. But one thing I would like to point out again is it does feel very, very close to the edge here. It's like it's similar to wildlife. It's when you have an animal walking, you don't want to cut its feet off right at the bottom of the frame. You want to leave a little bit of ground for it to stand on. And the same goes for these landscape type shots, is that I think what you were trying to achieve is to get this leading line going out of the bottom right of the frame. But now you as the photographer need to figure, is it best having it lead out of the frame on the bottom right or come in from the top left? And I know this is cropped to a 16 by 9, so there is space to work with. I'm pretty sure there's space below this dune. What I would recommend is rather get your leading line coming in from the top left and let that dune flow through to the bottom right. Even if you can't get your dune into the bottom right as you previously did over here, I would recommend that you just leave a little bit more space below this dune for your viewers' eyes to see a little bit more of the foreground in this particular shot. But I really do like this image. You could possibly work those shadows a little bit more. If you drop that a little bit more, it'll just make it'll darken up this corner, but it'll definitely make the sides a bit richer, a little bit moodier, and then possibly also to push your eye away from this general area, because yes, there is value there, but we could pull in a linear gradient from the right, something like that. So obviously we want this heavy feather so it doesn't affect the dune itself all too much. But yeah, we can just go down on highlights, drop shadows even more, and maybe just a touch down on exposure. So now you still have, if you zoom in here, you still have the details. You're not getting rid of these details. But if I now go put that on and off, can you see how it's not competing with the dune as much with that filter applied compared to when you deactivate that filter? Can you see that? So just a little bit of a push and pull technique here to make your viewers' eyes sit on this dune a little bit longer. But I think the biggest thing about this image is maybe just go and fix up where your leading lines are coming from and where they're going to. A bit more space below this dune would really be or would really help this image a lot. But a beautiful image and well captured. Yeah, love this. Absolutely love this. This is such a cool looking dune, and the fact that it looks so different from all the various angles is really cool. I love how you've kept in the hills and the horizon in the back there. Your aperture, where were we sitting? F10. Okay, so that's decent. Shooting at a wide angle, hence the reason we can still see really good detail way back here. So that looks really great. I do feel that or that bright background is pulling away from the foreground ever so slightly. And again, I feel it may be slightly contrasted and also pushing that saturation a bit, because that's very, very, very orange. And it just, to my eye, looks slightly different to what it naturally looked like. And one thing I love that you kept in this image is this parking lot of the dune at Dune 45. You can see the speck of the person down there. I love that you didn't go and clone and heal that out. Really cool to see that scale and emphasize the size of this dune. If this is cropped, I'm not entirely sure. One thing, if you have cropped it, is maybe don't go as tight as you have. Maybe leave a little bit more of the road in the foreground leading in, and maybe the end of this kind of tone and pattern and color. That could be quite beneficial to the image. But if not, that is not the end of the world. Just down on vibrance ever so slightly. So just changing. So I'm not taking away the orange. I'm just making like everything, if you look at the entire scene, like this scene that you're seeing right now, pretty neutral. Looking at this scene as the raw file, it is quite, it's got like an orange tone to it. And obviously all the dunes and the sand is orange, but it looks a bit too orange. So just by dropping that vibrance ever so slightly, in my opinion, has brought it to somewhat of a balance. And then a few things I will do here is maybe just go and grab a linear gradient. And again, a push and pull mechanism. Let's go pull that up, move this up. And then all we can do here is maybe just go drop highlights ever so slightly, because then you'll get a bit more detail back in that horizon, but also just dampen that highlight, because right now with it being so bright, it's pulling my eye up into that area, which you don't want. You don't want your viewer's eyes to go sit there. So just dampen that ever so slightly and bring the attention back down to the dune. Let's see if we go and reduce the temperature in that area, make it a little cooler. I think that looks pretty neat, because remember, you've got your complementary colors. If you look at the color wheel, there's a number of your primary colors will definitely go and complement one another in various scenes. And in this particular case, where you have a warm color and a cool color, and the nature of the scene, it really is complementing this particular photograph. Dropping that saturation some and definitely cooling down that background is working wonders over here. I think that really looks good. But other than that, I don't think there's any other push or pull type technique we need to do here. The shadow's deep and rich enough, and the contrast is great enough between these 2 points that your viewer's eyes will really go lock in there. If you really want to be finicky about it, we could always go and possibly grab a radial filter, but make it very elongated, with a nice heavy feather, something like that. So your viewer's eyes are on the main part of that dune, invert it, and then what we could do is just go down on shadows ever so slightly, and what that'll do is it'll just darken up that surrounding just a touch and make your I actually like that. So yeah, something like that looks great. Keep your viewer's eyes on the main part of this dune. Yeah, that looks cool. One thing I've just noticed, dust spots, very important, especially on landscape photograph, where you have a lot of these kind of bare open patches. Go and heal that so that people don't see it. But other than that, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful image. All right, and then the same dune, absolutely love it. I think you've got multiple ones here. Okay, oh yeah, come the... So this is that same dune, but just a different angle. I love that bowl shape. If you go and put that all into survey mode, I really, really like this. Out of them, I mean, I like the up close of this dip and kind of crater within the dune, but I must say I do prefer the ones where you see more of the dune. So these ones on the right and the bottom left here. So let's go out of this survey mode. Let's go into this guy. If anything, maybe a different crop would work, so that we're not incorporating that bare background as you see in these images over here and over here. So maybe a slightly tighter crop could work here. Let's go 69. It'll obviously, you'll have a better result and outcome in your raw file, or the file on your side, because I'm not too sure how much you've actually cropped this image. But if we go and eliminate some of the surrounding areas and we just kind of keep a flow to the image, so eliminate most of the textures and variety, but just keep a flow. So we've got a PowerPoint in the middle of this crater almost, a PowerPoint on this line leading your viewer's eye out, and then your PowerPoint just above this crater. So the main part that you want to show off is really being emphasized in this area over here. But then you have the dune running on the right here, that dune shadow up there, this line leading your eye out, and then that shadow line leading up to the left. There's now beautiful flow in that image. So there's less of that distraction. Oh, it's not going to show me that, but if I go into the crop, there's less of this distraction around the edges, and just going slightly tighter and highlight the flow and movement of the dunes in this particular scene without showcasing all the, in this, and in my opinion, the unnecessary in this image, and rather just hero on that kind of sinkhole in the middle of the dune. Really, really cool. And then possibly just drop down shadows, be a bit more aggressive there, because obviously you don't want to go show off the details in these shadowed areas. This is a dark, moody image, so go down on your shadows, drop those highlights ever so slightly, be a bit more aggressive on texture and clarity in this scene, because you obviously do have a lot of texture and detail around the sides. You obviously don't want to go to the extreme, because that's going to damage the image, but you just want to go up somewhat in these areas. And then what we could do furthermore is, again, because we want to emphasize the sinkhole, all these leading lines, the shadows, we can always just go and create a linear gradient from the top down and just go drop highlights in that area, Paul. Ever so slightly down on exposure, just a touch. And then you have an image which is very rich in shadow and contrast. Remember, when you do stuff like this, the saturation could get a bit out of whack, so you could go and just drop that a bit. I mean, a sepia look here could also really work well. Push up that dehaze. And you really then, instead of having the saturation of the scene being your hero, you're going to have contrast and the shapes, the lines, the patterns. And even that kind of looks like a human shadow, which it's not. But I would really recommend something like this rather than having the full image to show off, because you have that in the images that follow. Can you see that? I like this. This is very cool. I do feel like this is a bit of a nuisance, and that's kind of in the way. So you can always, if you really want to, go into Photoshop, go and get rid of that. I'm not too sure how well Lightroom will do. Let's have a look. Removing something this large, but let's see. Maybe it surprises us. Oh wait, it's actually going to work. Maybe. Let's see. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so haters will say it's Photoshop. It is. But it is, obviously there's a little bit of like a strange black shadow there, so just be more specific when you go and edit this image. But I think that looks really pretty, and without that eyesore and kind of bright patch, it really is looking cool. You can go and be a bit more finicky and just go and paint like these areas here. Let's go grab a brush and just go and highlight like this particular area. Doesn't matter if you hit the shadows all too much, because we're going to affect highlights and not shadows. In this area here, we can give it a light coat, but we don't really want to affect the dune itself all too much. Let's go down on, look at that. So just down on the highlights just a little, tap down on exposure, and just darkening up that soil really helps the eyes go and sit down over there. So if we go put that on and off, yeah, that's a major, major, major difference to this image. So look at that. Yo, very pretty. Cool. So here, so I'm going to go compare these again. Or not compare, but put them into survey mode. I'll get there. Survey mode. There we go. All right. So obviously these two, very similar. The one's just black and white. But I do prefer the flow of this one for some odd reason, but they're two very different looking images. And again, I think one thing needed in all of them is just a little bit more contrast. So maybe drop that shadow slider a bit, because the reason we opted for the afternoon flight is to have these deep, long, deep shadows all across the dunes in Sossel's Flow. And so if you ever are planning a flight, an aerial landscape flight, may it be dunes or even just wildlife, whatever it may be, afternoon or early morning would be ideal, because you have that sun that's sitting nice and low and creating these beautiful, deep, rich shadows down here. So I think, emphasize on that a little bit more on all of the images, because it seems like this is what's going to be needed throughout the dune images. There is a lot of highlight in the scene, so we could possibly dampen that ever so slightly. And remember, when we do things like this, saturation pops. So let's just drop that a touch. This one hasn't been affected all too much. But in terms of the crop itself, looking at this particular line, and again, I'm not too sure how much you've cropped this image, and if at all, but if you could get this leading line coming into the bottom right, and this line closer to the bottom left, that would be ideal. Obviously, if I try and do that now, it's going to destroy this image and throw it way off tilt. So I'm not going to do stuff like that. I'm just going to leave it be at this particular crop. I do feel that the left-hand side is a little bit bright, in my opinion. So what we could do is, because I don't really want to affect the dark areas of the scene, let's go and grab a linear gradient, pull it across most of the scene. But now what I'm going to do is I am going to intersect mask with luminance, and I'm just going to go select see how now I've selected a very bright patch within the scene. It's now going to leave all those shadows, and it's really just going to affect the highlighted areas. Have a look at that. Everything else has remained untouched. So what I would like to do here is literally just dampen the highlights and the whites on those areas ever so slightly, just so that it's not so punchy. So something like that looks cool. And then I think this has been edited very well. I think if the only things I would recommend is, if you can go and recrop this, I would try and keep this line into the bottom right and keep the back end of this dune closer to the bottom left. All right. So these are pretty much the same image. I see one just black and white and the other color. I do prefer, when it comes to dune photography, I'm not the biggest fan of black and white. When you work in a black and white, you really want your highlights to be very bright and your blacks to be very black, something like that. We can drop those shadows to make it even moodier. Unless there's like really, if you like, emphasizing on one particular pattern. So let me go back to, where was that image? Over here. So let's go back into Lightroom. So if you're working something like this and you're giving it like a nice tight crop, and you really want to emphasize the detail and the patterns and the moodiness there, then a nice black and white could work here, because you can go and work this area like heavily to go get like your textures out of bright areas like that. That could work really nicely. But when it's just an entire dune like this, I do feel that it looks better in color. So even though I went and created a bit of mood here, I still do prefer the color version over the black and white, but that's just a personal preference. But if you do want to work this in a black and white, just be a little bit more aggressive when it comes to finding pure whites, pure blacks, and dropping shadows in scenes like this so that you can get these deep and darker, rich type colors. A potential crop I could recommend here is maybe something a little bit more aggressive in terms of what you're showing off in this image. So it could be something like that. So eliminate that bright area in the top over there and just emphasizing this dark shadow and the details down in the surrounding areas over here. What we could do to emphasize and get that detail is, let's go and do a radial gradient. We don't really want to affect the dune all too much. Invert that. It's looking okay. So nice heavy shadow. Oh, not shadow. What's the thing called? A feather. And then here we can just go down on the blacks, the shadows, just to emphasize and bring a little bit more depth and contrast into the surrounding areas. Again, pushing your viewer's eyes onto the brighter side of the dune, but also adding a bit more contrast and depth into the surrounding areas. And the same will go for your color image. Let's see if I go and copy these settings. So I did Command C, Command V. Oh, it actually does, strangely. But it's because it's not the raw file. That's why it doesn't take it into black and white. So let's do a similar thing here. Let's go and crop it to kind of what that other one looks like in a sense. Something like that. But now, one thing in working the whites and blacks in the manner in which we did here, remember it is now very saturated. So just down on that vibrance ever so slightly, so you don't have this like overflow of orange and like smashing you in the face over here. Or let me just in the bottom left. But just by dropping that ever so slightly, you get more of like a bronzy sheen and shine to it. And that's why I say, instead of going pure black and white, I prefer maybe just desaturating it somewhat. You know, then you have this nice, beautiful, bronzy look and feel to the image. Let's go and put those two in servo mode. So I'm selecting them and tapping N. That puts them into servo mode. And then I'm tapping L to put lights off. Now, looking at those two, edited pretty much exactly the same way. The one is now just black and white, and the other to the right, obviously, is slightly more of like a sepia kind of look, or not really sepia. It's just it looks sepia just because of the color of the surrounding areas, but it's just desaturated somewhat. And I prefer what value that slightly desaturated image on the right brings over and above that of a pure black and white. But like I said, if you're going in tight for certain details, because I edited one of my images in Namibia, or one of my images from my recent trip to Namibia like that, but it was more similar, or it was similar to kind of something like that. So that could work better as a black and white in my opinion. Whereas the whole dune itself, as I've mentioned, I prefer something like that. Beautiful image, and I hope that helped you there, Beate. Here, oh, this is cool. Looks like a smile. It's really pretty. And I like, I don't know what happened there. I like the texture down in the bottom left here. One thing that is drawing my card. So remember, when it comes to photography as a whole, you're going to have certain things that are going to draw your eye depending on what the context of the scene is and what makes up the majority thereof. So in this particular scene, we've got a lot of bright. So these dark pockets, I don't know what is happening here. These dark pockets. Okay, I'm literally just tapping in and it's, okay, it seems to be working. These two are not a problem because it goes with the flow and the nature of what the scene is. The dark pocket that's drawing my attention away from what you want your viewers to look at is this guy up here. That's just my opinion. So again, in your raw file, you'll probably be able to crop it a bit better, but I would possibly go and crop out that dark corner and just keep, we can even go a 69 to make it a bit more, yeah, something like that. So in your raw file, you could possibly get more of this corner in as well. But in doing so now, we've now eliminated, in my opinion, what was a distracting element being that top left corner over there. And now we've just got this to work with. And similar to what I'd mentioned in previous images, just by dropping down shadows aggressively here, it's going to make a difference to the depth of the scene. We could even go down on blacks. And I actually want to try and see something here. If we go quite heavily down on our exposure the way we have there, alright, something like that. So this is obviously going to the extremes, and the cool thing with these kind of photographs is that it offers us the ability to do so. This could look cool in a black and white, but again, I would prefer more of a bronzy look. And now what I'm going to do is, again, let's go and find a range in luminance. We really just want to affect the bright areas of the scene. So it's not going to affect, because what I want to do is I want to lift these areas up a bit later. But let's go and dampen these areas, make them not as bright. So we don't want to go all the way, because we want some of the luminance there. But we're going to go in and make other areas slightly brighter than that by using a brush. So we still want to maintain balance in that scene. So now I'm going way off here, Beate. I'm going really creative. But let us go and create a brush and just go. I'm going to drop my flow quite well. I'm just going to go brush these areas. And I'm going to brush the, if I may call them the ribs, because it actually does look like ribs. Beate, I know you're vegetarian, but I have seen you eat a rib in the past in Iceland, so I feel I've got the right to say to say that. Okay, so something like that. And let's go and see if we go and increase highlights there and whites there, and maybe just a touch on exposure. Whoa, now look at that. Dang, I like that. I'm going to go back into this mask and just make it slightly. See, we don't want to go too much because we're going to lose our depth there. But let me, that's going to work. Drop saturation. Over here, let's go push up saturation just a touch. Do something like that. And then to finish it off, just to bring a bit of a balanced exposure into this, is let's go and let's zoom out of this. Whoopsie. Fit. Then let's go back to like 25%. Why is it not allowing me to do this? Just bear with me. There we go. Okay. So let's go and grab that mask again. And I've zoomed out to this point just so that I can bring my filter exactly to where I want it and need it to be. Okay, I'm going to go and invert that. Okay, make that a bit smaller. So remember, we just want to hero these ribs. Okay, so let's go to fit. Let's tap O. And now let's go drop highlights in that entire scene, exposure in that entire scene, and shadows in that entire scene. Let's go close this side. So now I've went way off a whack here, Beate, and I hope that you can, well, you're going to watch this back, and you can follow this. But looking at that, that's quite something. I really love how, to me, the most beautiful part about this scene is everything we see in red there now. The area we brushed, this area over here. And then I do feel, like I said, you could add in more of this texture down on the bottom left. I feel it shouldn't be there anymore. So we can always just bring a nice heavy filter in. Drop those highlights, whites, exposures. Make it nice and dark. We can go and add in with a brush just so we can make it a bit heavier in that corner. Just so we eliminate all that kind of white area. We can drop that flow all the way and just go darken any other little bit we'd want to darken. Maybe this foreground over here a bit. Maybe even the rim of this dune, creating a bit more depth. Sure, I really, really like that. That's cool. That's a beautiful moment captured, Beate. And obviously this is quite a heavy edit, and I usually don't spend so much time processing an image. But when it comes to textures and, let's do this, textures and patterns and things like we see these ribs over here, man, I like that. I like that a lot. Very, very cool. And then this, obviously the tree, I think they are somewhere in here. Maybe you went and cloned them out, because I know in mine there were a few trees in the area, actual trees, so not this kind of eroded tree, but this is really pretty. I really, really like this. How you've cropped it, I'm not sure. I think this is this a 4x5? Yes, it's a 4x5. If you want, you could keep it more as shot or original, to have a bit more space to work with on the sides. But I would like a little less of what's happening at the top. Less of that pan, that dead flare. Let's see if 16:9, no, that's going to be too tight. 5x7 maybe. Bring this down. Something like that. Now, it is better censored, but if you could, in your original, maybe you'd be able to just go and what I'm trying to get to here is maybe if I just do this and show you, it actually looks like a 1-to-1 crop, but something like that. So you're still keeping this greenery in, all while having a little less above this erosion at the top of the frame. I can see it does seem like you've put in a linear gradient over here, because you can see there's quite a distinct tone difference here between this corner and this area over here. And when doing these linear gradients, Beate, just remember, maybe you did it something like that. So therefore this area is super dark and it's got a short way or short space to fade into its feather, and therefore we can see this kind of line running through here. So maybe just use a much larger feather. Where are you? There you are. A much larger feather, something like that. And if you feel it's needed, you can go paint a little bit more. Or if you want to affect that entire area, you could always go with your color range and just go and draw a little block there, and it'll only affect these areas. Seeing that you might not want to affect the top half of this image, you can always go in and say intersect your mask with, so let's use another linear gradient and bring it in, bring it from, let me just flip that, the bottom up, I was supposed to say. See, and now it's going to evenly go and affect certain areas within that frame and leave the lighter and greener parts out of it. So that could work. But again, here I just feel a bit of a heavier shadow adjustment could really work in your favor. Something like that. Well, before we do that, let's go see what your pure whites and blacks are doing. So there we've got some whites. Okay, we got blacks there. And just by doing that, we're drawing a heck of a lot of contrast. Again, possibly just down on vibrance a little. And just those few little edits, I feel, bring this tree to life. It really does make it pop. And that's obviously what we want to show off, are these areas over here. So we could always go in with a brush, drop down blacks just a touch, and the shadows. And then by brushing this, it's not really going to affect the white pan itself. So if I go put that on, you can see the red. So I tapped O to get that overlay on. So I'm just painting these areas over here, because all we want to do now is emphasize and make the cracks and the shadows within those cracks a little darker, a bit richer, just so that they pop off of that bright background a little bit more. I can go up and something like that. So if I go put that on and off, it's really just emphasizing and showing off these cracks a little bit better. What you could always do as well to emphasize that dark area is go to your color range. Oh no, maybe I should say luminance. It might be a safe. Oh no, let's check. Okay, that's doing a fairly good job. We don't want it to hit this foreground though, but let's see. Let's see if I go highlights up. Yeah, I'll make that a bit brighter, whiter. It's really gonna punch and make that area a bit brighter, and therefore your tree is gonna bounce off of it a lot better. That's a really cool shot. And like I'd said, things like this could really work well in black and white as well, but I do prefer the slightly desaturated look and feel of this image. Okay, so those are all the dune shots. Well done, Beate. There's some really cool looking photograph in that short sequence. I know you've got tons more. We shot like crazy, but yeah, I hope those few tips and tricks have helped you there. But let's move on to your wildlife stuff. So the flamingo in Windhoek, this was. I really like these two kind of textural or close-up shots that you took. There we go. I really like that. I love how we can see all the detail on the beak on the right-hand side here, and just the head and body position of this one to the left. I really like that. I do feel, let's go into this tight one over here on the left first. I do feel that it is quite bright. You can see your midtones, so all that kind of not very shadowed nor highlighted areas is really peaking and spiking out there. But what this will allow us to do is maybe just go drop the highlights ever so slightly. It was a little bit bright. White, just a touch. You could always come pull shadows to the right a little bit more if you want a bit more detail in the beak over here. And I can see just by me wanting to zoom this to 100, it's telling me this is a very tight crop, and the same will go for this guy. Because if I zoom into this guy where you haven't cropped as much, it obviously takes me in a lot further. So, but it looks good. I mean, there's detail in the eye over there. To me, it looks like, I'm not too sure if you have worked that eye, but maybe, let me go 300. It takes me in a bit closer. But obviously, the more you crop, the image quality obviously drops tremendously. But I do feel that you obviously want your viewers' eyes on eye and beak, not so much the feathers on the back of the head. So what I'd recommend us do here is maybe go, again, let's go try luminance range and get the super bright area. Let's go and subtract it with a brush and take it off. We can increase the flow now. Go take it off the areas you want your viewer's eyes to focus on, being the beak and the eye. And then let's go drop our highlights, our whites. So we don't want to go too aggressive because then it becomes too unrealistic. So something like that. And then maybe just a radial gradient. Can make it quite a lot larger. Something like that. Invert it. And then just drop the highlights and the shadows around that bird a bit. And then the general exposure just a touch. Something like that's looking cool. You'll see I'm also going down on vibrance ever so slightly. Because remember, your viewer's eyes are going to be attracted to areas of contrast. So that's either very bright or very dark areas, sharp areas, and saturated areas. So in this scene, with me dropping the vibrance ever so slightly, we've ensured that obviously the highlight you can drop, you can see has reduced the viewer's eyes to go sit on the feathers on the back here. But by reducing the saturation, the entire scene has dropped saturation somewhat, but the eye remained pretty much the same. That wasn't really affected. And by doing so, you're going to keep your viewer's eyes locked onto the viewer's eye, the bird's eye. You could also go in with a brush, maybe go brush the beak itself if you want a bit more color in there, and just go up the saturation on the beak a bit, the white, just to make that punch out a little bit more. Cool. And then looking at these two shots over here, I can see this shot is cropped out of that one. So this particular image is this image, but just cropped very differently. I do prefer this one a lot more just because of the flow of these three heads, and this one kind of gazing over and looking a lot more than I do this busier one, because there's a lot more going on here. So I'm not even going to look at that image. I'll just focus on this one. I really like this. But again, here I can see we've got a beautiful background, which is great. That water that they're standing in. And then they're obviously super bright up against that dark background. You've edited it well. The colors look good. The crop's cool. Maybe if you can, let's go see, where's that other image? Okay, I don't know if you've cropped this one, but above its head, if you can leave just like a few millimeters, so just a little bit more blue above its head, that would be ideal. If you don't have that, not a problem. But what we can get away with in this image is maybe just drop the exposure of this entire image a lot more, because that background is so dark. They're going to pop off of that background very, very well. But by underexposing so much, we're obviously going to preserve color a lot more. So it might look a bit more saturated. So all we need to do, if you don't like the heavily saturated look, is maybe just drop the vibrance ever so slightly. And that's literally all I'd recommend you do to that image. I wouldn't do all too much. That looks really cool. If by going under on your exposure all too much is reducing the details in the shadows a bit, you can always just lift that ever so slightly. And then you have a bit more balance there. Because your raw file, which is this, or the one you sent through to me, the birds do seem a little bit too bright. Just by dampening that exposure a bit, there's a little bit more balance in my opinion. I really like that. If 2 cents worth here. Here are these guys over here. Let's go and invert that mask. So let's get their 3 heads in. We can always go drop a bit of shadows there. But what I was trying to do here is maybe just dampen, kind of paint the bodies of the birds on in the corners a bit more than you do the bird necks in the middle of the scene over there. But yeah, let's just go down on whites, make it a little bit darker down on shadows, just so that your eye is pushed away from those dark corners a bit more. I like that. Very cool. So obviously a heavy crop here, which, I mean, we can see there's still good detail here. And obviously this isn't going to be an image you can go print nice and big because it's just so cropped. But maybe put it through gigapixel. You can get some good detail and clarity back in there. Maybe topaz sharpening. But I like what you're trying to do here and get the texture of this bird's beak and face up against the feathers. And again, I think because of the dark background, what this will allow us to do is drop the exposure a bit. And when you drop that exposure, let's push up shadows somewhat. Drop that vibrant, and in doing so, we can also push whites a bit more. But by dropping that exposure, because remember, this is obviously a very tightly cropped image, and Beate, you'd know, I'm just saying this for other people watching, your camera would have incorporated, when it was metering for the shot, a lot of this dark background. And therefore, it would have affected what setting and shutter speed setting it would have given you to give you a well-balanced image over here. Hence the reason I know we can go under quite a bit more here. But in doing so, and making it less bright, if I may, we are also preserving some detail. Can you see that? So maybe just bear that in mind when you're processing. But a really cool idea, and I hope that me showing you this little trick of just making it somewhat darker can add a little bit more value to the scene. You can also take the time to make these feathers in the background. So let's go see what happens here if we say background. Okay, let's go and subtract it from our subject. I don't know what it's seeing as our... that's not going to work. Okay, let's go and use a... Did I say subtract? Subtract with a brush off the face of this bird. Because we don't want to affect our main subject here, of course. So my edges might be a little bit rough. But when you're doing this, Beate, just go make sure that you are not going over the lines all too much. But let's just go down on whites, exposures just a touch, shadows, highlights, yeah, something like that. Yeah, that looks really cool. So now you're just making the background slightly darker, because without that, these feathers down in the foreground are the brightest part, and your eyes are being drawn to that because of this very dark beak of this bird. But by dampening and darkening up, and also maybe desaturating that ever so slightly, you're kind of forcing your viewer's eyes to stay on the beak and the face of this bird. I really like that. That's cool. Oh, very cool. I remember speaking about these water droplets and trying to capture them. I love this. If you can, go and look through your catalog. Maybe you have a few more in which you don't have other birds right behind it. And also just be mindful of these dust spots. So there's another dust spot here. Let's go and get rid of that. Okay, something like that. But a similar thing I would recommend us doing here, because of that, because of that bright background. And again, there's a funny color tone here. So Beate, I don't know if I am seeing this right. But yeah, there's definitely... So what I think might have happened is maybe this water droplet was lower down in this brighter patch of water. And if that's the case, that's okay. I would have done something very similar. We could maybe look at this at Mala Mala in a week's time or so. But it could be that because you've picked it up from a different luminance area, that it's giving us this funny result. Because I've literally just picked that up now when I look closely at this water droplet. But I know why I'd want to do that, because it's obviously adding value, but I think it was probably way down here. Let's have a look at that. Because there should be a way around not getting that strange little color cast over there. But again here, just dampening that exposure ever so slightly, increasing shadow some to bring a bit more detail into this bird, and then drop that saturation ever so slightly. We can up on whites a bit, make it pop off that background, and then something like that. You'll see there's a lot more detail in that bird's face and beak. Let's go across here. Look at that. All right. Cool. Nice little oryx. I like this. This is very cool. The textures behind him. Let's see if what your... Okay, so you got pure whites there. Blacks here. Yeah, I think with the amount of... And I'm not going to be able to work this all too well, but I know this background is very orange in color. So what I'd recommend is in your... Well, it'll say H and B&W, so black and white, you'll still have your color sliders there. But what I'd recommend is maybe going darker on your orange. Make your orange darker, because then this will go a lot darker and he's going to pop off that orange a lot better. I won't be able to do that in this scene, but that was going to be my first go-to, was to do something like this, because by darkening the back wall, he will automatically really pop out of that scene a lot more. So this is maybe another one we can look at Mala Mala Sabi Sabi. See, then it would have done something similar to that. So I'm going crazy on dehaze. So that's not a way I'd edit an image, but that's the result it would have given us if I dropped the luminance of the orange itself. But speaking of and saying I won't edit it like that, I actually think that looks pretty cool. Usually dehaze can damage an image quite a bit, as you can see there. But if you can work it to a point where it looks something like this, that would work really cool. We can obviously drop shadows here as well, because this is all shadows and there's good highlights hitting him on the head. Drop blacks ever so slightly. So remember, with a black and white image, if we look at the raw file, that to me looks very bland and flat. His skin color or tone is blending into majority of what we see around him, as are his horns. But if I go to this image over here, by darkening up that background, he's really popping off of that background now. And therefore there's a distinct difference in tonal range and colors and contrast between him and that background, really making him pop off. But yeah, editing a black and white image without having the raw information can be quite tricky. So we can look at that once we get out on Safari again in a few days. These owls, these were cool. Yes, I remember you spotting these on our way to the Skeleton Coast that morning, and that was a good spot, Beate. And I think this was the one that probably ate that mouse, looking at all the muck around its beak over there. But I like what you did here. Obviously, quite a tight crop. The light was challenging. So obviously, the tighter you crop, the less detail you have, or your image quality drops, excuse me. But there's still detail enough. You can see some really cool feathers and so on over here. And one thing I'd recommend, I do not like these edges, and that's just a personal thing. What I'm going to show off here, or show to you here, is something that could possibly help us eliminate those edges. So let's have a look. Let's go. Let's zoom out of this a bit. Let's go to 33. There we go. Yeah, something like... Okay, let's see. Let's zoom back into that. We can go edit this quite aggressively along these edges. But I love how these eyes really just pop out at you here. Let's go down on general exposure a bit. And up on the white. Something like that. And then, I don't know if... I'm not the biggest fan of... see, I don't even know where it is anymore. Over here. So your vignette. Not the biggest fan. But this could work in our favor to just darken up those corners. And I usually, when I used to use it, I started it off like this. With a 0 feather, just for me to get my angles right. And what I mean by angles is the shape and so on of the actual vignette, the roundness and all that kind of stuff. Something like... Okay, so we're not going to be so aggressive, but something like that. Okay, let's go back up to basic and just drop the exposure of that general scene. Push those shadows. Okay, then I'm going to go use a brush and just dampen up this corner and that corner, and maybe just a touch over the head, but not much there. But I've painted the corners heavily just to go and eliminate like those areas there, so we don't really see them anymore. And then maybe in tone curve where you can push the lights up a bit, bring those darks down. I do feel this eye is slightly darker than the one on the right now, and that's due to my editing and my process. So what we could do here is just use a radial gradient. Here's quite a nice feather. And then just push up highlights, the exposure. Alright. Jump down into here. So now I've put a little dot on that intersection in the shadowed region. And I'm going to come down to the bottom left, kind of draw up somewhat. Now it's making the pure blacks more grey and not all too black. And what I like about this is it is giving it more of like a vintage kind of look and feel to the whole image. It's allowing us to get a bit more creative. So from a perfectly exposed image for the bird itself, going more of that creative route helps us eliminate the background a bit better. But also, because it's such a tight crop, helps us and allows us to be a bit more creative when it comes to making certain areas a bit darker than they should and having the eyes a bit brighter than they should. You're going to see what I'm going to do here now is I'm just painting this region here, and I'm just going to lift the whites ever so slightly to make those areas. So obviously the feathers around the beak are already super bright, so let's go paint the head a bit more than we would have the front over here. Let me just go drop. Okay, so that flow is down, so I'm just going to remove some off the beak over, or the feathers around the beak over there. You can see all that's doing is popping it. But now we've gone and made it more of like this darker, eerie, moody type look and feel compared to that. I actually really like this image. That's very cool. And by dropping saturation, you're still going to keep those super yellow eyes, but either will work, having it saturated or slightly desaturated. Really, really like that. That looks cool. Our seals, the friends. This place. Whew. Just like as this image popped up, I could smell them again. But a really cool moment. I love how you've captured the mood of this guy. Kind of looks like he's in prayer, basking in the sun. If there are moments, because I know he was sitting there for quite some time, excuse me. And these guys in the back, because this ocean was full of seals, they were all leaping and jumping and doing their thing around the waves over here. So if you have one in which you can see one seal kind of breaching out or jumping out the water while this guy's sitting like that, that would be really, really cool. But one thing I'd recommend in terms of crop, if you don't have the other, there's a bit of this contrast on the edge. So let's go and get rid of that. But also in doing so, you're going to make him, boom, smack bang. Oh, wait, I need to go and lock that. You want to go and make him kind of dead center in the scene. Because now you have these rocks, for example, over here that he's sitting on, working like an arrow pointing up to him. And then his body language sitting up like that, he's now looking out and up, is pushing your energy up and out of that scene. So it's kind of like a shape of a pyramid over here, or a triangle. So yeah, maybe put him smack bang in the middle. I like how you have processed that background, but if you can find one where a seal's leaping out the water in the back here, that would be great. But one thing I'd recommend you work in your favor is this foreground shadows and these highlights on these rocks. So let's go have a look for pure white and pure black. There we go. So you've got some there. Okay, there's a lot of black in the foreground. Drop those shadows and up those highlights. We can also get super creative here if you don't have one where he's jumping up, or have a seal jumping up and out the water over here, is we can go and eliminate that background entirely, because already just by doing what we've done here, we've eliminated most of... Okay, that's quite a zoom. Let me not zoom in that much. Most of what's happening over here. All right, because we've got good highlight coming off his chest and good highlight on the rocks in the foreground over here. So let's go start working that background. Before we do that, let's go into tone curve, go back into our regional slider, work those lights up and darks down just a touch. And by doing that, we're just going to create a little bit of contrast in this foreground over here. What you could also do, if you don't want a lot of that background over there, is we can just change the crop to a portrait, a landscape orientation, but I do actually like this a lot more. But by just pull it down a lot more so that we have less of that water and just more of him sitting on these rocks. But in doing so, we need to be very mindful of edge contrast. So we don't want to kind of leave, say, a gap like that. That's why I cropped it specifically down to a point where I'm not getting any of these strange contrasts on the edge. And to me, I feel that's really singing a lot more than adding what was a detailless and blown background. So a slightly tighter crop to me seems to be doing the trick. Before I move on to anything in the foreground, I'm going to see what it gives me when I say background. Okay. Don't want to do that, because all I really want to get rid of is that bright area over there. So, and that'll be easy enough to get away with a brush. So something like that. And then certain areas here, a bit more of this brush. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'm going to take blacks to the right, highlights to the right, And there we go. Boom. It's eliminating that background for us. There we go. So now we've got a nice clean background. And we've got the seal to work within the foreground. I'm pretty sure you did use your detail slider here. And by default, I think it sits up around 25 or 40, somewhere there. But we want to make sure that we mask this properly so that the foreground is what's getting most of this white area added to it. And what I'm doing here is I'm pushing and holding Option or Alt on Windows, I think it is. And then by left clicking my cursor on masking, the black area or the white area is what's being sharpened or getting this tool added to it. The black area is not. And I don't want to sharpen areas I don't want detail in. So I'm just going to sharpen kind of this foreground area and these highlighted areas on this seal. So something like that's looking cool. And then what we can do here is, let's go see what it gives us if we go and say, select our subject. Okay, so it's actually working pretty well just on the seal. But now we want to add in with a linear gradient over here. Somewhere there. Subtract. So I'm going to go and subtract this background because I don't want this to be affected at all. I just want to work the textures in this foreground for now. We don't want to go and affect the background. So something like that's looking cool. Okay. So here we want to make those whites on them a little bit whiter. Make those darks dark. Like really make it rich and moody. Increase those shadows a bit. Make it pop. Highlights up a bit. And just in doing so, we're just creating that contrast in this foreground over here. Yeah, that's really popping nicely. I like that. And then let's go and see if I go and select background, but I'm going to intersect with a linear gradient. Okay, then I'm going to go subtract with a brush, and I'm going to take it off the rock our animal is sitting on, because we don't want to affect this area. We want to keep the rich detailed moodiness in this foreground. Put that back in there. So what I'm going to do to the background is I'm just going to make it a little bit more hazy by going down to dehaze and dropping that to the left. Dropping clarity. Increasing our highlights. And what that's doing is it's literally just washing out that background a bit more for us. We can even drop our contrast, make it a bit hazy back there. Drop the white so it's not as bright. We can even go right on blacks to make it more grey and not all too black. And then push clarity up just a touch in the entire scene. And what I would like to finish with is just to make this foreground a little bit darker, is a linear gradient from the bottom up. And drop the exposure in the foreground. Yeah, something like that. And then that will be my before and after. You could also always go and finish it off with a brush on the animal's face over here. I see there's a bit of white hair on its eye. I mean, there's a lot of brightness on its chest already, so we don't really want to go and affect that area all too much. But let's go up on exposure just a touch, and whites just a touch on the face. And in doing so, you've got a really cool, moody looking image. I like that. Very cool moment captured here, Beate. Very, very nice. And then what? Oh, and that's it. That's the last one. Boom. Awesome stuff. Well done, Beate. There's some really cool moments in there. As I'd mentioned, there's obviously a lot that we didn't see in this collection. So if you would like to see everything we got up to in the areas we visited while in Namibia, feel free to go check out the trip report. And yeah, thanks again for sending these, Beate. I really appreciate it. It was fun working through them. I hope that you and everyone else who has watched this video has learned something and can apply it in the future. But if you yourself, Beate, or anyone else have more specific questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. I'll happily assist. If you want your images reviewed and you've traveled with us before, please get in touch. We'll happily help you out. If you want to see similar content to what you're seeing over here or what you just watched, our YouTube channel and blog is full of good and interesting information and content. So feel free to spend some time, browse through that. But as I've mentioned, if you have specific questions, feel free to get in touch and I'll happily assist. Thank you so much for your time and your ears, and I'll chat to you all soon. Bye-bye.